6 months after his divorce, a millionaire took his new supermodel girlfriend out, but the waitress was his 7 months pregnant ex-wife, just working to survive. The golden glow of Meridian's chandeliers cast everything in that warm, expensive light that money can buy. You know the kind, where every surface gleams just a little too perfectly, where the laughter sounds just a little too polished. Ethan Bell stepped through the mahogany doors like he owned the place. Which, honestly, he probably could have if he'd wanted to. At 38, Ethan had that kind of confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance. His Armani suit fit like it was painted on, his Rolex caught the light just right, and his smile. Well, his smile was the kind that had closed million-dollar deals and broken more than a few hearts. Tonight, though, that smile was reserved for Candace. She walked beside him like she was floating, all legs and cheekbones and that effortless beauty that graced magazine covers. 26 years old and stunning in that way that made other women hate her just a little bit. Her dress probably cost more than most people's rent, but on her, it looked like it grew there naturally. "This place is incredible," Candace breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the crystal glasses, the fresh orchids on every table, the soft jazz floating through the air like expensive perfume. Ethan's chest swelled with that familiar pride. He loved this moment, the introduction to his world, the way her eyes lit up, the way she looked at him like he was some kind of magician who could conjure up beauty and luxury with a snap of his fingers. "Wait until you try the lobster," he said, his hand finding the small of her back as the maitre d' approached. "Giuseppe, my usual table." "Of course, Mr. Bell. Right this way." They were led through the dining room like royalty, past tables full of Manhattan's elite, past conversations about art auctions and Caribbean vacations, and the kind of problems that money could solve. Ethan felt that familiar rush, the one that came from being seen, from being somebody, from maturing in a way that could be measured in zeros on a bank statement. Their booth was perfect. Corner placement, leather seats that probably cost more than a car, a view of the entire restaurant so Ethan could see and be seen. He slid in across from Candace, already reaching for the wine menu. "So," he said, that trademark smirk playing at his lips, "ready for the full Ethan Bell experience?" Candace laughed, that tinkling sound that had first caught his attention at the gallery opening 3 months ago. "Is that what we're calling this?" "Trust me, sweetheart, dating a younger woman has its perks. No baggage, no drama, no." The words died in his throat. Because standing there, order pad in hand, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, was Claire. His Claire. Well, not his anymore. Not for 6 months now. But seeing her there, in her black server's uniform, her belly unmistakably round beneath the fabric, it was like the world had tilted sideways and forgotten to warn him. 7 months pregnant. The math hit him like a punch to the gut, but before he could process it fully, she was speaking. Well, well, well. Claire's voice was honey over broken glass, sweet and sharp all at once. "Ethan Bell, long time no see." She looked at him, really looked at him, and then her gaze slid to Candace with the kind of assessment that could strip paint. When she smiled, it was all teeth and no warmth. "You still allergic to emotional depth, or did therapy finally work?" The restaurant around them seemed to hold its breath. Ethan felt Candace tense beside him, felt the curious glances from nearby tables, felt the familiar burn of Claire's particular brand of warfare. But God help him, even pregnant and angry and wielding a water pitcher like a weapon, she was still beautiful. Still the woman who used to make his pulse race. Still the one who could read him like a book he'd forgotten he'd written. "Wow, Claire." He found his voice, wrapped it in that cool control that had served him so well in boardrooms. "Still using sarcasm as seasoning, huh? Must be exhausting." She moved around their table with practiced grace, filling water glasses with the kind of precision that came from doing something 1,000 times. But when she leaned over to pour Candace's water, she took her time. Let the silence stretch. "And you must be the new model," Claire said to Candace, her tone so pleasant it was almost insulting. "Let me guess, you like older men because you think they're stable?" Candace blinked, clearly caught off guard. She looked between Claire and Ethan like she was watching a tennis match played with grenades. Claire straightened, one hand resting on her hip, the other still holding the water pitcher. "Just a little friendly advice, sweetie. Wait until he misses your birthday for a board meeting, or cancels your anniversary dinner because Tokyo called. really puts things in perspective. Claire, Ethan started, but she cut him off with a look. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I embarrassing you? In public, her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. How terrible that must be for you. Candace found her voice finally, that nervous laugh bubbling up. This is awkward, Claire supplied helpfully. Yeah, divorce tends to be. Especially when one person does all the fighting to save the marriage and the other person does all the leaving. The words hit their mark. Ethan felt his jaw clench, felt that old familiar anger rise up in his chest. The same anger that had fueled their last fight. The one that had ended with lawyers and papers and 6 months of silence. Right? He said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that meant trouble. Because you were so easy to live with. Miss, why don't you love me anymore every time I had to work late? Work late. Claire's eyebrows shot up. Is that what we're calling 14-hour days and weekend business trips? I must have missed that memo. She moved to the next table, clearing empty plates with movements that were just a little too sharp, a little too precise. But she wasn't done. She never was. Tell me, Candace, she called over her shoulder. Has he introduced you to his real mistress yet? Her name is Work, and she's been the other woman in every relationship he's ever had. Ethan stood up so fast his napkin fell to the floor. That's enough. Is it? Claire turned back to them, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. Just for a second, he saw the hurt underneath all that anger. The same hurt that had been in her eyes the day she'd asked him to choose, and he'd chosen his office instead of their bedroom. But then the mask was back, and she was all professional smile and poisoned courtesy. So sorry. What can I get you folks to drink tonight? Besides the obvious, a time machine and a personality transplant. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Claire moved through her section like a dancer, but every time she passed their table, she found new ways to twist the knife. When Ethan ordered the steak, she asked if he wanted it commitment-phobic rare or emotionally unavailable well done. When Candace mentioned she was a model, Claire nodded sympathetically and said, "Oh, you poor thing. He has a type, beautiful, young, and temporary." And through it all, Ethan found himself watching her. The way she moved despite being 7 months pregnant, the way she handled the other customers with genuine warmth, the way she never quite looked away when she thought he wasn't watching. Because underneath all the anger, underneath all the hurt and the cutting words, there was something else. Something that sparked between them every time their eyes met. Every time she got close enough that he could smell her shampoo, the same brand she'd used when they were married. Chemistry, the kind that had brought them together in the first place, the kind that had made him believe in forever once upon a time, the kind that was dangerous as hell when wrapped up in this much unfinished business. Candace's breaking point came with the dessert menu. Claire had just finished explaining the chocolate souffle as rich, decadent, and likely to disappoint you in the end. Kind of like some husbands I could mention, when Candace's fork clattered against her plate. I can't. Her voice was tight, controlled, but Ethan could see the flush creeping up her neck, the way her hands shook slightly as she reached for her purse. I can't do this. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor loud enough to draw stares from the neighboring tables. Her hands were steady now, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears of frustration. Candace, sit down, Ethan said quietly, but she was already shaking her head. No, I thought. She looked at Claire, who was standing there with the dessert menu still in her hands, watching the scene unfold with what might have been satisfaction or might have been regret. I thought your ex was just bitter. You know, the typical scorned woman thing. She turned back to Ethan, and her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. But she's not just bitter, Ethan. She's right. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Around them, the restaurant hummed with its expensive conversations and clinking glasses, but their little corner had gone dead quiet. Everything she said tonight, about the missed dinners, the work obsession, the way you choose everything else over the people who love you. Candace's laugh was hollow. 3 months, Ethan. We've been together 3 months, and I can already see it. The way you check your phone during our dates, the way you talk about deals while we're making love, the way you look at your watch when I'm talking about anything that isn't business. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. I'm calling an Uber. Don't follow me. Don't call me. And definitely don't send flowers with some generic apology note your assistant probably wrote. Candace, you're being dramatic. Am I? She looked at Claire, then back at him. Or am I just paying attention? She walked away, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown timer, and Ethan watched her go with that familiar sinking feeling in his chest. The same feeling he'd had 6 months ago when Claire had packed her bags and walked out of their penthouse for the last time. The same feeling he'd had a dozen times before when work had won and love had lost. He was still standing there, watching Candace's figure disappear through the restaurant's front door when the manager appeared at his elbow like a well-dressed vulture. Mr. Bell. Richard Morrison was sweating despite the restaurant's perfect climate control, his face flushed with the kind of panic that came from watching a very public scene unfold in his establishment. Sir, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this situation. Ethan turned to look at him, then at Claire, who had gone very still beside their table. Her face had gone pale, all the fight draining out of her as she realized what was coming. This behavior is completely unacceptable, Morrison continued, his voice getting louder, more righteous. Absolutely unprofessional. I assure you, Claire will be terminated immediately. Tonight. This instant. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. Ethan watched her flinch, watched her hand instinctively move to protect her belly, watched her world crumble in real time. Please. Her voice was barely a whisper, all the fire gone out of it. Please don't fire me. Morrison turned to her with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. You've embarrassed this establishment, Claire. You've harassed one of our most valued customers. I need this job. The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. I have a baby coming. I have rent. I can't afford to lose this job. Please. For the first time all evening, Claire looked small, vulnerable. The fierce woman who had been taking verbal shots at him all night was gone, replaced by someone who was 7 months pregnant and scared and facing the very real possibility of financial ruin. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been protectiveness, or might have been the ghost of love that had never quite died. It's fine, he heard himself say. Morrison blinked. I'm sorry, sir. I said it's fine. Ethan's voice was steady, controlled. Don't fire her. Mr. Bell, with all due respect, her behavior tonight was. It was between us. Ethan looked at Claire, who was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. This is personal history, Richard, not professional misconduct. Morrison looked confused, caught between his desire to please a wealthy customer and his need to maintain order in his restaurant. Are you certain, sir? I'm certain. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and old wounds. Claire was still staring at him, her eyes wide with something that might have been surprise or might have been suspicion. Finally, Morrison nodded reluctantly. If you're sure, Mr. Bell. But Claire, he turned to her with a warning finger. This cannot happen again. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, Claire managed, her voice hoarse. Morrison bustled away, muttering under his breath about difficult customers and unprofessional staff, leaving Ethan and Claire alone in their bubble of awkward silence. She was the first to break it. Well, her voice was steadier now, but there was still a tremor underneath. How noble of you. Coming to the rescue like a knight with a tax break. There it was. The Claire he recognized, all sharp edges and defensive walls. But he could see through it now, could see the fear that had been hiding underneath all that anger. Wouldn't be the first time I saved your ass, he said, aiming for light, but hitting something darker. She flinched like he'd slapped her, then rallied with a bitter smile. Maybe, but it's usually on fire because of you in the first place. Morrison had disappeared back into his office, and the other servers were giving them a wide berth, leaving them standing there surrounded by the detritus of their ruined evening. Untouched plates, abandoned wine glasses, and the lingering scent of everything that had gone wrong. So what now? Claire asked, her hand resting on her belly in a gesture that was becoming familiar. You expect me to curtsy and thank you for your magnanimous gesture? I don't expect anything from you, Claire. I never did. No, she said quietly. That was always the problem, wasn't it? You never expected anything. Never asked for anything. Never wanted anything from me except to not make waves while you conquered the world. The truth of it hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Because she was right. He had expected her to be there when he got home. Expected her to understand when work ran late. expected her to be satisfied with the scraps of attention he threw her way between meetings and phone calls and the endless pursuit of more. Claire, save it. She started gathering the plates from their table, her movements sharp and efficient. I need to get back to work. Some of us don't have the luxury of making grand gestures and calling it even. She paused, balancing the plates in her arms, and for just a moment her mask slipped again. Just long enough for him to see the exhaustion underneath, the bone-deep weariness of someone who was fighting battles he couldn't even imagine. Why? She asked, so quietly he almost missed it. Why didn't you let him fire me? The question hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they wanted to cross. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman he'd married, the woman he'd loved, the woman whose heart he'd broken because he'd been too proud and too scared and too convinced that success was measured in dollars instead of moments. Because, he said finally, even at my worst, I never wanted to hurt you. Not really. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Or lies. Or the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Well, she said finally, mission not accomplished. She walked away then, leaving him standing there with his half-empty wine glass and his guilty conscience, surrounded by the golden light and expensive laughter of a world that suddenly felt very empty indeed. And as he watched her disappear into the kitchen, Ethan realized that somewhere between the confrontation and the near firing and the moment she'd looked at him with fear in her eyes, something had shifted. The game had changed, and for the first time in 6 months, he wasn't sure who was winning anymore. The morning sun painted Manhattan in shades of gold and shadow, but from his corner office on the 42nd floor, Ethan Bell barely noticed. He'd been sitting there for over an hour, coffee growing cold at his elbow, staring out at the skyline that usually made him feel like the king of the world. Today, it just felt empty. The view was perfect, Central Park stretching out like a green carpet, the Hudson River glinting in the distance, the whole city spread out below him like a promise he'd already kept. This office had been his sanctuary for years, the place where deals got made and empires got built, the place where he felt most like himself. Except today, he wasn't sure who that self was anymore. Last night kept playing in his head like a broken record. Claire's face when she thought she was going to lose her job. The way her hand had moved instinctively to protect her belly. The look in her eyes when he'd stepped in. Surprise mixed with something that might have been gratitude or might have been suspicion. 7 months pregnant. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. That baby was his. You planning to stare a hole through that window? Or are we going to talk about whatever's eating you alive? Ethan didn't turn around. He knew that voice, gravelly, direct, with just enough concern underneath the gruff exterior to be dangerous. Greg Hoffman had been his right-hand man for 8 years, ever since the early startup days when they'd been two guys with big dreams and bigger debts. Nothing to talk about, Ethan said, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Greg snorted, settling into the leather chair across from Ethan's desk without being invited. At 62, he had the kind of presence that came from decades of reading people for a living. Silver hair perfectly groomed, suit expensive but understated, eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Right. Greg folded his hands in his lap, studying Ethan with the patience of a man who'd waited out boardroom standoffs and hostile takeovers. That's why you've been sitting there like a statue for the past hour. Nothing to talk about. Ethan finally turned away from the window, but he couldn't quite meet Greg's eyes. It's complicated. It always is with you. Greg's voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. You know, I've watched you close a $10 million deal with Sony with more emotion than you showed on your wedding day. Stone-faced, calculating, completely in control. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. But last night, whatever happened at that restaurant? You came in here looking like someone had reached into your chest and rearranged your organs. So either you want to tell me what's going on, or I'm going to start making educated guesses. And you know how much you hate my guesses. Despite everything, Ethan found himself almost smiling. Greg had a way of cutting through his defenses that was both infuriating and oddly comforting. Like having a father figure who refused to let you lie to yourself. I saw Claire last night. Oh. Greg nodded like that explained everything. Which, knowing Greg, it probably did. How's the ex-wife? Pregnant. The word came out flat, emotionless. 7 months. Greg was quiet for a long moment, doing the same math Ethan had been doing all morning. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. I see. She was working. As a waitress. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect styling for the first time in months. At Meridian, of all places. Serving me and Candace like she was nobody. But she's not nobody. No. The admission came out like a confession. She's not. Greg was watching him with those sharp eyes, seeing everything Ethan was trying not to say. You still love her. It wasn't a question, but Ethan felt compelled to answer anyway. It doesn't matter what I feel. We're divorced. She made her choice. I made mine. Did you? Greg's voice was deceptively mild. Because from where I sit, it looks like you're both still fighting the same war you started 2 years ago. The question is whether you're fighting each other or fighting for each other. Ethan stood up abruptly, pacing to the window again like he could outrun the conversation. You don't understand. The things she said last night, the way she looked at me, like she was hurt, like she hated me. Same thing sometimes. Greg's voice followed him across the office, relentless in its gentleness. Ethan, I watched you build this company from nothing. I watched you sacrifice everything, sleep, health, relationships, to make it succeed. And I watched you convince yourself that success meant more than happiness. Success pays the bills. So does a regular job. But that's not why you did it. Greg stood up, moving to stand beside him at the window. You told me once that you wanted to build something that mattered. Something that would last. You said you wanted a legacy. Ethan was quiet, remembering that conversation from years ago, back when the company was just an idea and Claire was just the woman he couldn't stop thinking about. What kind of legacy is an empty penthouse and a bank account that nobody's going to remember when you're gone? The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan closed his eyes, seeing Claire's face again, not angry this time, but the way she'd looked on their wedding day. Radiant, hopeful, so sure that they were going to conquer the world together. She deserved better, he said quietly. Yeah, she did. Question is, what are you going to do about it now? I don't know. Ethan turned away from the window, meeting Greg's eyes for the first time since the conversation started. I don't even know if she'd want me to do anything. She's moved on, built a life without me. Maybe I should just what? Let her raise your child alone while you pretend you don't care. Greg's voice was sharper now, cutting through Ethan's self-pity like a blade. You think that's noble? You think that's what she wants? I think she wants me to leave her alone. Then you're an idiot. The bluntness of it shocked a laugh out of Ethan. Tell me how you really feel, Greg. I feel like I'm watching a man I respect make the same mistake twice. Greg moved back to his chair, but he didn't sit down. You want to know what I think happened last night? I think she was testing you. All that anger, all those cutting remarks. She was waiting to see if you'd fight back. If you'd fight for her. She walked away from me, remember? Not the other way around. Because you let her. The words hung in the air like a challenge. You let her pack her bags. You let her move out. You let her file the papers. You never once asked her to stay. The truth of it was suffocating. Ethan sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. I thought if she really loved me, she wouldn't have given me an ultimatum. Choose the company or choose her. And what did you choose? I chose. Ethan stopped, the words dying in his throat. Because the truth was, he hadn't chosen anything. He'd just stood there, paralyzed by the thought of losing either one, until Claire had made the choice for him. You chose nothing, Greg said gently. And that's a choice too. They sat in silence for a while, the morning sun climbing higher, the city waking up below them. Finally, Greg spoke again. You know what I think? I think you're scared. I think you've spent so long building walls around your heart that you forgot how to tear them down. And I think Claire is the only person who ever made you want to try. Ethan looked up at him. This man who'd become more than an employee, more than a friend. Who'd been there through every triumph and every failure. Who'd never once let him settle for less than he was capable of. What if it's too late? Greg smiled, and for the first time all morning, it reached his eyes. Then you'll have tried. And that's more than you can say right now. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling something shift in his chest. Something that might have been hope or might have been terror. So, Greg said, settling back into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. What's the plan? The Blue Moon Cafe wasn't much to look at from the outside. Just a narrow storefront squeezed between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore, with a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. But through the window, Ethan could see warm lights spilling across mismatched tables and chairs, and the kind of casual atmosphere that Meridian would never achieve, no matter how much money they threw at their interior designer. He'd been sitting in his car across the street for 20 minutes, working up the courage to go inside. Greg had been right about one thing. He was scared. Terrified, actually. The last time he'd tried to have a real conversation with Claire, it had ended with divorce papers and lawyers and 6 months of radio silence. What made him think this time would be any different? But the image of her hand moving protectively over her belly, the fear in her eyes when she thought she was going to lose her job, he couldn't shake it. Couldn't pretend he didn't care anymore. Finally, he forced himself out of the car and across the street, pushing through the cafe's front door with the kind of determination that had built his company from the ground up. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the scent of coffee and fresh-baked pastries wrapped around him like a warm hug. It was the complete opposite of Meridian. No crystal chandeliers or mahogany paneling, just exposed brick walls covered with local artwork and the gentle hum of conversation from customers who actually seemed to be enjoying themselves. And there, behind the counter, was Claire. She looked different here. Softer, somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a blue sweater that stretched gently over her belly. She was laughing at something the customer in front of her had said, her whole face lighting up in a way that made Ethan's chest tight. When was the last time he'd made her laugh like that? She spotted him before he could find a table, her smile freezing in place like someone had hit a pause button. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the cafe, and Ethan felt like a teenager again, awkward, uncertain, completely out of his depth. The customer moved away with their coffee, and Claire was left standing there with a dish towel in her hands, watching him with the wary expression of someone who'd been burned before. "You here to eat or to investigate?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Both." She rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it was like stepping back in time, and pointed to a booth near the window. "Sit. I'll get you a menu." The booth was small, intimate, with a view of the playground across the street where children were laughing and climbing on brightly colored equipment. Ethan found himself watching them through the window, wondering if his child would play there someday, wondering if he'd be around to see it. Claire appeared at his elbow with a laminated menu and a glass of water, her movements efficient but not unkind. Up close, he could see the subtle changes that pregnancy had brought, the fullness in her face, the way she moved a little more carefully, the unconscious way her free hand rested on her belly. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something different now, something that made it hard for him to look away. "So," she said, sliding into the booth across from him with a soft grunt of effort, "what brings you to my humble workplace? Besides the obvious desire to make my life more complicated, I wanted to see you." The words came out more honest than he'd intended, and he saw her blink in surprise. "To talk to you. Away from all the—" He gestured vaguely. "Drama." She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Claire." He stopped, unsure how to continue. All the speeches he'd rehearsed in the car suddenly seemed inadequate. "How are you? Really?" She studied his face for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if the question was genuine or just another way to hurt her. Finally, she shrugged. "I'm fine. Tired, but fine. The baby's healthy. I have a job that pays the bills, and I'm managing." She paused, then added with just a hint of her old fire, "No thanks to you." The jab hit its mark, but he didn't flinch. "I know I haven't been present these past few months." "Present?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. Completely absent might be more accurate. I didn't know how to." "How to what?" "Pick up a phone. Send a text. Show the slightest interest in whether your ex-wife was okay." Her voice was rising slightly, drawing glances from other customers. She noticed and forced herself to lower it. "You don't get to play the confused ex-husband card, Ethan. You made a choice." "You're right." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I did make a choice, and it was the wrong one." She stared at him, her lips slightly parted, like she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. "What?" "I said you're right. I made the wrong choice." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table between them. "I chose pride over love, work over marriage, being right over being happy. And I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Claire's eyes were bright, but he couldn't tell if it was with tears or anger. "You can't just—" You can't just say things like that and expect everything to be okay. I don't expect anything to be okay. I just. He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture from their college days. I just needed you to know that I know. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. And I know I don't deserve another chance. She was quiet for a long time, her hands wrapped around her water glass like it was an anchor. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, uncertain. Then why are you here? Because that's my baby. The words came out fierce, protective, surprising them both. And because I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I was too stupid and too proud to fight for you. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, glancing around to make sure none of her coworkers had noticed. Ethan, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking, let me help. Let me be here for you and the baby, however you need me to be. She was crying openly now, quiet tears that broke his heart all over again. I can't do this here, she whispered. I'm at work, I can't. I know. He reached across the table without thinking, covering her hands with his. She didn't pull away. I know. I'm sorry, I just. Just what? I missed you. The words were barely a whisper, but they might as well have been shouted. I missed you so much it felt like dying. Claire closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling over. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Something that might have been hope. I have to get back to work, she said finally. I know. And this doesn't fix anything. One conversation doesn't erase 6 months of silence. I know that too. She slipped her hands out from under his, the loss of contact hitting him like a physical blow. But when she stood up, she paused, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The baby kicks at night, she said quietly. Around 11, like clockwork. He's going to be a night owl, just like his father. His throat felt tight. We don't know for sure yet. But yeah, I think it's a boy. She touched her belly gently, and for just a moment, her face was soft with wonder. He's going to have your stubborn streak. I can already tell. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but the words were stuck in his throat. All he could do was nod and watch as she walked back to the counter, her shoulders straight and her head high. He left a tip that was probably 3 times what his coffee cost, and walked out into the afternoon sun feeling like something fundamental had shifted. She hadn't forgiven him. He didn't expect her to. But she hadn't told him to stay away, either. And for the first time in 6 months, that felt like hope. That evening, Ethan called Candace. She picked up with venom already loaded. Are you seriously calling me right now? He started. No, Ethan. You don't get to call me after that disaster like it's some normal follow-up. I owe you an apology, he said, voice calm but firm. You were right. About all of it. And I'm sorry. I put you in the middle of something I clearly hadn't finished living through. She let out a bitter laugh. Finished? You never even started getting over her. You brought me into that restaurant like I was some arm piece to parade around, while your eyes never left hers. You humiliated me. I didn't mean to. You never mean to. That's your whole thing, isn't it? She snapped. Too busy being lost in your own head to see what you're doing to people around you. There was a pause. Her breathing slowed, but her voice stayed sharp. And you know what hurts the most? She said, quieter now, but no less cutting. She still loves you. That was obvious. And the second I saw the way you looked at her, I knew I never had a chance. Ethan didn't try to defend himself. He just sighed. Candace let out a long, shaky breath. Then, like air finally leaking from a punctured balloon, her anger deflated. So, she said bitterly, what now? You going to try and win her back? Be the hero after all? I'm going to try to be the man I should have been before I broke everything. She scoffed, but it wasn't cruel now. Just tired. Then do it. You loved her. You still do. So either grow up, or stay away for good. He opened his mouth, but she was already done. Good luck, Ethan, she muttered, and hung up. He stood there in the quiet, her words stinging like alcohol in a fresh wound. But somewhere beneath the burn, it felt like the first step toward healing. The pain hit Claire like a freight train at 2:47 a.m. She'd been dreaming about the lake house, the one where she and Ethan had spent their honeymoon, where they'd talked about having children someday while watching the sunrise paint the water gold. In the dream, she was walking along the shore, her belly round and full, Ethan's hand warm in hers as they planned their future together. Then she woke up, gasping, her hands clutching her stomach as a contraction ripped through her body like lightning. No, no, no. She whispered to the empty darkness of her studio apartment. It's too early. Please, not yet. But her body wasn't listening to reason. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, doubling her over as she struggled to sit up in bed. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed mockingly. 8 weeks too early, her mind calculated frantically. Way too early. Panic rose in her throat like bile. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone in a way that felt like drowning. Her sister lived in Portland, her parents in Florida. Her friends from her married life had mostly chosen sides, and Ethan's side had deeper pockets and better parties. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through her contacts with the desperate focus of someone looking for a lifeline. Her finger hovered over her sister's number, then her doctor's, then 911. Instead, almost without conscious thought, she found herself dialing a number she knew by heart. A number she'd deleted and re-added to her phone at least a dozen times over the past 6 months. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, his voice came through, rough with sleep, but instantly alert in the way that had always amazed her. Like he could switch from unconscious to completely present in the space of a heartbeat. Claire? What's wrong? Even through her pain, she almost smiled. He'd always been able to read her, even from the sound of her breathing. Especially then. Ethan. His name came out as half sob, half relief. Something's wrong. I think. I think the baby's coming. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she heard rustling, the sound of feet hitting the floor, keys jingling. Where are you? Home. My apartment. But it's too early, Ethan. It's way too early. I'm coming. Right now? Have you called the doctor? Another contraction hit, and she couldn't answer for a moment. Could only breathe through it like the prenatal classes had taught her, the classes she'd attended alone, surrounded by couples holding hands and planning nurseries together. Claire? Talk to me. I'm here. The words came out as a gasp. I'm scared. I know, sweetheart. I know. But you're going to be okay. Both of you are going to be okay. I'm already in the car. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Sweetheart. He hadn't called her that in over a year. Not since the fights started getting mean and the silences started lasting longer than the conversations. The endearment wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and familiar and achingly precious. What if? No what ifs. His voice was steady, sure, the same tone he used in boardrooms when million-dollar deals hung in the balance. We deal with what is, not what might be. Can you get dressed? She looked down at herself. Oversized sleep shirt, bare legs. Hair probably looking like she'd been wrestling with her pillow. Which, honestly, she had been. Sleep hadn't come easily since the restaurant encounter 2 weeks ago. I think so. Good. I'm 5 minutes away. Breathe with me, okay? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. And somehow, impossibly, she found herself breathing with him over the phone, their old rhythm coming back like muscle memory. He'd taught her this technique years ago during her panic attacks in law school, before she dropped out to support his dreams, before everything got complicated and angry and irreparably broken. But right now, in the darkness of her studio apartment with contractions coming every few minutes, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just the father of her child, and she was just a woman who needed him. I'm outside, he said, and she could hear a car door slamming. Buzzer 4B, right? Yeah. I'm coming up. She managed to pull on sweatpants and grab a sweater before she heard his footsteps on the stairs, taking them 2 at a time by the sound of it. His knock was soft but urgent, and when she opened the door, the relief hit her so hard she almost collapsed. He looked like he'd thrown on the first clothes he could find. Jeans, a rumpled button-down, sneakers without socks. His hair was sticking up in the back, and there were pillow creases on his cheek. She'd never seen anything more beautiful in her life. Hey, he said softly, and then his arms were around her, steady and warm and exactly what she needed. I'm here. I've got you. She breathed in the scent of him. Expensive cologne mixed with sleep and the faint smell of coffee that seemed permanently embedded in his skin. For a moment, she let herself melt into his embrace. Let herself remember what it felt like to not be alone. Then another contraction hit, and she pulled back with a sharp inhale. Hospital, she managed. We need to go to the hospital. Already called ahead. Dr. Martinez is meeting us there. He grabbed her purse and the overnight bag she'd packed optimistically at 36 weeks. never thinking she'd need it this soon. Can you walk? I think so. But when she took a step, her knees buckled slightly, and he was there instantly, his arm around her waist, taking her weight like it was nothing. Lean on me, he murmured against her hair. Just like old times. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and worry. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm during the worst contractions. He talked the whole way, about nothing and everything, his voice a steady stream of comfort designed to keep her mind off the fear. Remember our first date? He said as they waited at a red light. You were so nervous you spilled wine on your dress. White wine on a white dress, she corrected automatically. You said it gave me character. I was trying to make you feel better. You looked like you wanted to crawl under the table. I didn't want to crawl under the table. I was convinced you were going to think I was a complete disaster. He squeezed her hand. Instead, I thought you were perfect. The contraction that hit her then was different, sharper, more urgent. She gripped his hand so hard she probably left marks, but he never flinched, never pulled away. Almost there, he said, and she could hear the worry underneath his calm exterior. Just hold on, sweetheart. Almost there. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Wheelchair, elevator, monitoring equipment, doctors speaking in the kind of calm, urgent tones that meant serious business. Through it all, Ethan stayed beside her, his presence solid and reassuring in a world that had suddenly gone chaotic. False alarm, Dr. Martinez announced after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Braxton Hicks contractions, not real labor. Common in the third trimester, especially with stress. Claire felt herself deflate with relief, so profound it was almost painful. The baby's okay? Baby's fine. Heart rate is perfect, position is good. But you need to take it easy. Less stress, more rest. Do you have someone who can help you? Claire's eyes found Ethan's, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just the recognition of a question that needed answering. Yes, he said quietly. She has someone. Dr. Martinez nodded, satisfied, and bustled out with promises to check on them later. The room fell quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital life. You don't have to, Claire started, but Ethan cut her off with a shake of his head. Yes, I do. He pulled the uncomfortable hospital chair closer to her bed, settling in like he planned to stay. I should have been here all along. I should have been with you through all of this. Ethan, no, let me say this. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. When you called tonight, when I heard the fear in your voice, I've never moved so fast in my life. I've never been so scared. She studied his face in the dim hospital lighting, the worry lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly despite his calm exterior. I thought I was going to lose him, she whispered. I thought I was going to lose our baby, and I realized I couldn't do it alone. I don't want to do it alone. You don't have to. The words came out fierce, determined. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I screwed up everything we had. But please, let me be here for this. For you. For him. Claire felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something that might have been hope. I'm so tired of being angry. Then don't be. We don't have to figure everything out tonight. We just have to figure out now. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the corporate shark or the workaholic or the husband who'd chosen his office over their bedroom. Just Ethan, scared and hopeful and completely present in a way he hadn't been in years. Okay, she said softly. Now. He smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him since before everything fell apart. Now. And for the first time in months, as dawn crept through the hospital windows and Ethan's hand warm in hers, Claire felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. 3 weeks later, at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like the most important day in the history of the world, Liam Alexander Bell decided he was ready to make his entrance. Claire had been having mild contractions since dinner, but she'd learned to tell the difference between false alarms and the real thing. These were real. These were the kind that made her breathe through pursed lips and grip whatever was nearest, which, in this case, happened to be Ethan's hand. He'd been staying in the guest room of her apartment for the past 3 weeks, close enough to help, but far enough to give her space. They were still figuring out what they were to each other. Not quite together, not quite apart, something new and fragile and hopeful. "This is it," she said, her voice tight with pain and anticipation. "This is really it." Ethan was already moving, grabbing the hospital bag they'd repacked twice, calling Dr. Martinez, helping Claire into the coat that barely fit over her belly anymore. But his hands were steady, his voice calm, like he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. The labor was long. 18 hours of contractions that felt like they were reshaping her from the inside out. 18 hours of Ethan holding her hand and counting breaths and reminding her that she was the strongest person he'd ever known. "I can't," she gasped during the worst of it, sweat beading on her forehead, exhaustion making everything blur at the edges. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Ethan's voice was hoarse from hours of encouragement, but it never wavered. "You're almost there, sweetheart. So close. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I mess this up like I messed up everything else?" "Hey." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Look at me. You're going to be an amazing mother. You're going to love him so much it'll scare you sometimes. And you're not alone. You're never going to be alone again if I have anything to say about it." And then, suddenly, after what felt like a lifetime of pain and fear and hope all tangled together, there was a cry. Sharp, indignant, absolutely perfect. "He's here," Dr. Martinez announced. And then she was placing this tiny, wrinkled, impossibly beautiful creature on Claire's chest. The world stopped. Everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the complicated mess of their relationship, all of it faded into background noise. There was only this, their son, red-faced and furious about being evicted from his warm home, his tiny fists waving at the injustice of it all. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, her hands trembling as she touched his perfect little face. "Oh my God, look at him." She looked up at Ethan, and what she saw there made her heart crack wide open. He was crying. This man who prided himself on control, who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, was crying like his heart was breaking and healing all at the same time. "He's perfect," Ethan said, his voice thick with wonder. "Claire, he's absolutely perfect." And he was. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair that was pure Ethan, and lungs that announced his arrival to anyone within a 3-block radius. When he finally settled against Claire's skin, his cries fading to soft, snuffling sounds, he opened his eyes. Dark blue, like his father's. "Hello, Liam," Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." The next few hours passed in a haze of exhausted joy. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and filling out paperwork. Claire dozed fitfully, her body finally relaxing after months of carrying their son. And through it all, Ethan stayed. He held Liam when Claire slept, this tiny person fitting perfectly in his large hands like he was made for it. He changed diapers with the same focused intensity he brought to board meetings. He learned to swaddle like it was the most important skill he'd ever acquire. "You're a natural," Claire said, watching him rock their son with gentle, careful movements. "I'm terrified," he admitted, but he was smiling as he said it. "I've never been responsible for anything this precious. Welcome to parenthood. The terror never goes away, it just gets more manageable." They didn't talk about the future. Not that night. Not while everything was so new and fragile. They just existed in the moment. Two people who had loved each other and lost each other and found their way back through the most beautiful complication either of them had ever encountered. But as the sun rose over the city, painting their hospital room in shades of gold and possibility, Claire knew something had shifted permanently. Whatever happened between her and Ethan, whatever they decided to call themselves, they were family now. Connected forever by this perfect little person who had somehow managed to heal wounds they'd thought were too deep to mend. 3 months later, Claire woke up in her apartment. Their apartment now, officially, though Ethan still slept in the guest room most nights, to the sound of off-key singing coming from the kitchen. She found him there, still in his pajamas at 8 in the morning, Liam propped against his shoulder while he attempted to make coffee one-handed. He was singing some nonsensical song about breakfast and babies and how daddy couldn't function without caffeine, and Liam was staring up at him with the kind of fascination reserved for the most important person in your world. "You're going to give him a complex," Claire said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile she couldn't contain. "Too late. He already knows his dad is ridiculous." Ethan grinned at her, then made a funny face at Liam, who rewarded him with what might have been a smile or might have been gas, but was perfect either way. This had become their routine. Ethan worked from home 3 days a week now, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He came over every morning with coffee and stayed for dinner most nights. They shared middle-of-the-night feedings and first smiles and the exhausted joy of new parents figuring it out as they went along. They hadn't talked about getting back together. Not officially, but somewhere between Liam's first bath and his first laugh, between sleepless nights and stolen moments of peace, they'd started rebuilding something new. Not the marriage they'd had before. That one had been built on assumptions and taken for granted until it crumbled. This was different. Deliberate. Careful. Real. "I have something for you," Ethan said, transferring Liam to his bouncy seat and reaching for a small wrapped box on the counter. Claire's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Ethan, if that's what I think it is." "It's not." He handed her the box with a smile that was nervous and hopeful and achingly familiar. "Well, not exactly." Inside was a photograph. Their wedding picture. The one where they were both laughing at something the photographer had said, looking at each other like they held the secret to happiness. Claire remembered that moment perfectly. The way the sunlight had felt on her skin, the way Ethan had whispered, "I love you," just before the shutter clicked, the absolute certainty that they were going to make it. Behind the photograph was a folded piece of paper. Legal-sized, official-looking. Claire unfolded it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the words that didn't quite make sense at first. A deed. To the lake house. The one where they'd spent their honeymoon, where they'd made plans and promises and believed in forever. Signed over to her and Liam. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Liam grab at the colorful toys dangling from his seat. When he spoke, his voice was soft, careful. "Because that place holds our beginning. The best parts of who we were before everything got complicated." He looked at her then, and she saw everything in his eyes. Regret and hope and love and the kind of vulnerability that had always scared him. "I thought maybe one day it could hold our future too." Claire stared at the deed, at the photograph, at this man who had broken her heart and was now offering to help her heal it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try again. Not the way we were before, but something new. Something better." He moved closer, but not too close, still giving her space to choose. "I'm saying I love you. I love our son. I love the family we're building together, one day at a time. And if it doesn't work, if we mess it up again, then we'll figure it out. Together." He smiled, and it was the smile she'd fallen in love with all those years ago, hopeful and honest, and completely his. "But I don't think we will. I think we learned something from the first time. I think we know better now." Claire looked at Liam, who was watching them both with those serious dark eyes, like he understood that something important was happening. Then she looked at Ethan, at this man who had hurt her and left her and come back when she needed him most. "Okay," she said finally, the word coming out like a breath she'd been holding for months. "Okay." She stepped closer, close enough to touch his face, to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Okay, let's try again." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, like finding something precious that had been lost and discovering it was even more beautiful than you remembered. Liam chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, and they broke apart laughing. This little family that had been broken and mended and was somehow stronger in the places where it had cracked. Later, Claire would frame that wedding picture and put it on the mantel of the lake house, right where everyone could see it. A reminder of where they'd started and a promise of where they were going. But for now, she was content to stand in her kitchen in the morning light, Ethan's arms around her and their son's laughter filling the air, knowing that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that get a second chance to end the way they were always meant to.